In a moment no one expected, King Charles broke down in tears while handing Prince William a final, deeply personal gift. Behind closed palace doors, a velvet box changed everything. Inside, a letter filled with raw emotion, a childhood photo, and a ring once belonging to Queen Elizabeth. It wasn't just a keepsake. It was a symbolic transfer of responsibility. Charles, weakened by illness and weighed down by the crown, looked into his son's eyes and said, "You're ready now." It wasn't a public coronation, but something far more powerful. The king let go, and the heir became something more. A final meeting between father and son. It began with silence. No palace announcements, no court photographers, just a quiet request from King Charles. A private audience with his eldest son. No staff were permitted, no royal aides present. This was not for the press, not for history books. It was for them. Inside the private quarters of the palace, William arrived unsure of what to expect, but he knew it mattered. Charles stood waiting, his frame smaller, his presence quieter than usual. He wasn't wearing his crown. He wasn't surrounded by advisors. Today, Charles wasn't the monarch. He was a father. They didn't speak at first. The room, thick with emotion, held decades of memories, regrets, and love unspoken. Then, Charles reached into his jacket and pulled out a small velvet box. His hands shook slightly. His eyes locked on William's. He said nothing, just offered it gently. A silent gift with 1,000 meanings. This wasn't ceremony. It wasn't tradition. It was raw. It was personal. And as William accepted the box, he realized this wasn't just a conversation. It was a transition. A silent moment that said, "It's your turn now." But the box held more than a symbol. It held a lifetime. The gift passed through generations. Inside the box, resting on velvet, lay a single, worn object, King Charles's signet ring. A royal heirloom passed through generations, worn by kings before him and held close through wars, peace, and scandal. It wasn't just a ring. It was a promise. A curse, a burden. The ring shimmered faintly in the warm light, its golden crest etched with history, family, and duty. Charles stared at it, then at William. He didn't speak in long sentences. He didn't need to. The gesture said everything. This was not just a hand-me-down. It was the unofficial signal of transition. William's hand hovered above it, reluctant at first. He'd seen that ring for decades, on his father's finger during meetings, ceremonies, and coronations. It had always represented the crown. But now, it felt different. Now it was coming to him. Charles finally spoke, his voice soft but steady. "This doesn't make you king, but it reminds you that one day you will be." William took the ring and held it in his palm. It was heavier than he imagined, not in weight, but in meaning. And in that instant, the boy who had once watched his family unravel stepped into a future already written. The note that changed everything, but the box held something more. Beneath the ring, folded neatly, was a handwritten letter. William opened it slowly. The paper smelled faintly of ink and age. His father's script was there, sharp, practiced, and deeply personal. 6 words, that was all it said. Lead with heart. Forgive with strength. William read it twice, 3 times. He didn't need more. Those 6 words hit harder than any royal decree. They weren't advice. They were a confession, a legacy, a final message from a father who had lived through chaos, carried secrets, and loved silently. Charles watched his son closely, tears threatening to fall. "I wrote that not as your king," he whispered, "but as someone who's made mistakes." It was a reckoning. Charles had never been one to wear his emotions openly. But now, in this room, stripped of power, stripped of protection, he offered William his soul, fragile, honest, and desperately hoping his son would do better. William folded the note and slid it into his jacket. He didn't speak. The silence was louder than words. The gift, the letter, it was everything Charles couldn't say, and everything William would never forget. Charles breaks down. What followed next was the moment no one outside that room would ever fully understand. Charles began to cry, not as a king, as a man, as a father who had watched his marriage crumble, who had buried the mother of his children, and who had failed in more ways than he could ever admit publicly. He spoke of Diana, not as the Princess of Wales, but as the woman he hurt, the mother he failed to protect. He recalled the public disaster of their union and how William had to grow up with cameras watching his pain. "I wasn't perfect," he said softly, "but you'll be greater than me." William stood, still, overwhelmed. He had trained his entire life for duty, but nothing prepares a son for watching his father fall apart, not from illness, but from regret. Charles wept openly. The silence between them cracked, and for a moment, everything fell away. The palace, the monarchy, the weight of the crown. There was only father and son, broken and bonded by blood, grief, and history. In that moment, William saw the man behind the role, and he would carry that image into every room, every decision, every step toward the throne. Diana's presence in the room. Though she wasn't there physically, Diana was everywhere in that room, in the silence, in the ring, in the tears. Her legacy hung between them like a ghost, unseen but undeniable. Charles spoke her name gently, with the reverence of someone who had learned, too late, what he had lost. He admitted to things he never had before. Not in press conferences, not in private. Only now, at the edge of his reign, could he face them. "She would have been proud of you," he said, voice shaking. "She always saw the strength in you, even when I didn't." William didn't reply, but the emotion in his eyes said enough. For decades, he had carried both their legacies, his mother's love and his father's duty. Now they collided in this one moment. Had Diana lived, the ring might have passed under entirely different circumstances. But fate had chosen a more painful path, one that left William standing between two legacies, one born in heartbreak and the other breaking right in front of him. And as he held the ring and remembered his mother's voice, he knew this wasn't just inheritance. It was redemption. For both of them, a gesture of apology. The private exchange between Charles and Anne didn't just speak of love. It hinted at something deeper, a royal apology hidden beneath monarchical veneer. For years, whispers swirled about strained roles and expectations within their relationship. Anne, fiercely loyal yet often sidelined, had watched as Charles took center stage. Their bond, forged in childhood, had navigated choppy waters, especially around the time of his divorce and remarriage. Now, standing alone with no staff or cameras, Charles offered more than a gift. He offered a gesture of reconciliation. The brooch, the photograph, the letter. It was as though he was saying, "I couldn't acknowledge you as much as I should have." When he handed her those items with words of trust, there was warmth. But beneath that warmth lay regret, unspoken sacrifices, and perhaps some guilt. Royal aides later reported that Charles had softened in private these past months. He talked more freely about his guilt as a father toward Anne and his other children, yet had always remained formal in public. This moment broke that barrier. When he said, "You were always the one I could trust," it carried the weight of decades unexpressed. It wasn't just praise, it was penance. Anne's silence in accepting wasn't coldness. It was acknowledgement of both the gift and the apology. She tucked away each memory-laden item carefully, almost reverently. And in that silence, the apology was reciprocated. It was private, yes, but also powerful. Two siblings, finally finding emotional symmetry in the shadows of duty. Health concerns. Behind the gift? The gift's timing couldn't be ignored. Charles had been through health scares before, but this felt different. Insiders say he's shown signs of fatigue far beyond what treatments can explain. Moments of forgetfulness, visible pain, emotional withdrawal. His public engagements, once numerous, became rarer. When he appeared, there was a changed energy, a king acknowledging his human limitations. The brooch and letter may symbolize not just trust, but farewell. Observers now believe this could be a preemptive goodbye, from one royal generation to the next. Charles, facing mortality, may be preparing Anna not just emotionally, but institutionally. He wants her secure, protected, acknowledged. Anne's recent schedule shifts support this. She has canceled official duties without explanation and asked for private time. Even her husband has stepped back, respecting her need to process. People sense this was more than a moment of apology. It was a gesture shaped by awareness of time's passing. Could this gift be Charles's way of saying, "I may not have much longer"? A soft signal that succession is not with Camilla or William yet, but there is sibling reassurance being sown quietly in Balmoral. The health undercurrent adds emotional depth to every component of that box. A goodbye, a thank you, a shield in times to come. Hidden messages in the letter. The letter was written in Charles's hand. No aids, no edits. A rarity for a royal of his caliber. It's described as deeply personal, written without concern. For headlines, he references their childhood. He references past errors, perhaps mistakes in the royal structure, or coldness toward her. Some who have read summaries believe it touches on tragedies beyond his divorce, even Mary Mother's death, and crises within the monarchy. Experts say the letter reads more poetic than political, more emotional than ceremonial. One aide described it as almost literary, a gift in words. He reportedly asks Anne to hold the monarchy and the family together after he is gone. It may contain requests to support William and Catherine behind the scenes. If so, this tiny letter carries the weight of a secret constitutional instruction. Anne's reaction, silence and tears, suggested that the letter isn't just a warm note. It's a manuscript of trust and responsibility. A message meant to outlive both siblings. In her quiet acceptance, she signals readiness to protect their legacy and to carry burdens Charles may no longer be able to bear. The brooch and Balmoral photo, symbolic tokens. Inside the small box that King Charles handed to Anne, the two most powerful items weren't priceless gems or royal documents. They were simple, but soul-stirring. A delicate brooch and a faded photo. Together, they told a story no speech ever could. The brooch, though small, held deep significance. Palace insiders confirmed it once belonged to their mother, Queen Elizabeth II. It wasn't a flashy showpiece meant for grand events. It was personal, one of her early favorites worn during informal gatherings, particularly during holidays at Balmoral. That Charles chose this brooch was no accident. It symbolized their mother's legacy, and perhaps more intimately, the childhood the two of them shared under her strict but steady reign. It was a maternal thread woven back into their bond. Anne held it like it was sacred, her thumb gently brushing over the pin, as if remembering the way their mother once wore it. It wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was an echo of the past, wrapped in memory and meaning. Then came the photograph. It showed Anne and Charles, no older than 6 or 7, running barefoot across the lush green lawns of Balmoral. Their faces were bright with unfiltered joy, captured in a time before cameras were tools of scrutiny, before titles weighed on their shoulders, before duty separated them into roles that would often isolate rather than unite. That image reminded them both of a time untouched by royal politics. It was a return to roots, a reminder that beneath the medals and uniforms, they were still those same children. Just 2 siblings shaped by the same house, the same parents, and the same expectations that neither could escape. Together, these 2 items were more than sentimental tokens. They were time machines. Charles, nearing what many believe is the final chapter of his public life, wasn't simply giving Anne keepsakes. He was reminding her of who they were, before the world told them who they had to be. And in that moment, as Anne clutched the brooch and stared at the photo, the emotional power of those simple symbols spoke louder than any public ceremony. No fanfare, no flashbulbs, just truth, private, heartfelt, and irrevocable. Reactions inside the palace. In the hours that followed the exchange between Charles and Anne, a quiet ripple moved through the palace. It wasn't panic, but it wasn't peace either. Those closest to the king had known something personal was coming, but none expected it to feel so final. Staff who had served the siblings for decades noticed an immediate shift. Anne, usually brisk and unapologetically focused, moved more slowly through the halls. Her expression was softer, not broken, but deeply reflective. She didn't speak much to aides, but one reportedly overheard her whisper to herself, "He's preparing me." Charles, meanwhile, didn't rejoin official meetings that afternoon. He remained in his suite, receiving only his closest advisors. Some sources say he had a second letter delivered later that night, perhaps to William or another senior royal. Whatever its contents, the air was thick with transition. Even the Queen Consort's wing of the palace noticed changes. Her staff reported a cancelled dinner, minimal interaction, and a closed-door meeting between Camilla and her private secretary. She may not have known the exact contents of the letter to Anne, but she likely understood its purpose. Charles wasn't just settling emotional matters, he was beginning to let go. By the next morning, murmurs had reached the royal press offices. Without confirming details, the palace released a carefully worded statement about deep appreciation for family support during the king's ongoing recovery. But behind the polished words was a growing realization. Something had shifted within. The monarchy's core. The Queen's former private secretary, now retired, commented privately that this kind of personal gesture from a monarch is both rare and telling. "It's the sort of thing you do," he said, "when you've accepted that your time is limited." Palace aides began adjusting schedules subtly. Charles's future engagements were scaled down. Anne's travel was reduced. There was an unspoken agreement among senior staff. Prepare for change, but don't announce it. Within those walls, the brooch and the letter became symbols not just of family, but of a quiet transition already underway. And as Anne moved through the palace, her shoulders square, but her eyes weary, everyone who saw her understood. The end of something had begun, and the palace would never be the same again. Public and media buzz. Once whispers of Charles's private moment with Anne reached the outside world, the silence of the palace didn't contain them. Royal correspondents, pundits, and energized online commentaries dissected every detail. Was this a farewell? A sign of abdication? A health crisis? The exchange between king and princess wasn't just heart-tugging. It became a sensational symbol. Coverage exploded. Headlines questioned what was said in the letter, what the brooch represented, and whether this gesture signaled a pivotal turn in royal succession. Social media buzzed with speculation. Supporters praised the king's vulnerability. Critics questioned the monarchy's transparency. Royal commentators invoked family history, reminding readers that Charles and Anne had weathered scandals before. But now, this felt different, personal, raw, and unguarded. Anne, usually untouchable by the press, became front-page material. Interviews from decades ago resurfaced. Her stoicism was praised, but the tear at Charles's gesture reframed it. Royal watchers noted that after the gift, she sharply reduced public duties. The media framed it as her contemplative retreat. Meanwhile, Charles's decreasing visibility raised questions about his health. Rumors of renewed illness spread. The palace's refusal to issue a full explanation intensified suspicion. And when Charles accepted fewer events, schedules were swapped and engagements reassigned. Headlines screamed, "Is a transition underway?" Even without formal announcements, the world felt the shift. The monarchy had always managed image with precision. This time, they were reacting. Through it all, Anne remained out of sight. The silence spoke louder than any statement. The media narrative went from caring touch to controlled exit. But for many, this was no crisis. It was transformation. Royalty, after all, must adapt. And this gesture marked the beginning of that shift, with Anne now deeply entwined in shaping what comes next behind the public scenes. What this means for the monarchy. This moment between Charles and Anne reached far beyond family affection. It foreshadowed power reconfiguration at the monarchy's heart. A king's emotional gift to his daughter, private, profound, unfiltered, signaled more than nostalgia. It suggested deliberate preparation for what comes after. Anne, long regarded as the crown's skeleton, reliable, dutiful, firm, might now become its quiet guardian, a behind-the-scenes stabilizer during uncertain times. Her decades of diplomatic, equestrian, and charitable service give her unmatched credibility. It's not about stepping into the spotlight, it's about holding the frame steady when the picture shifts. As Charles steps back, by necessity or by choice, Anne's role gains weight. Charles's choice to entrust Anne with such a conscious gesture involved legacy planning of emotional, not constitutional value. He may have meant to comfort her, but he also laid groundwork for her continued influence. Royal aides, we are told, acknowledge that Anne's voice is now being given room where before only the heir's voice mattered. Meanwhile, Camilla's presence fades further. Without Charles standing as her protector, her influence becomes ever more symbolic, if not ceremonial. And for William and Catherine, the dynamics change. Their reign approaches, but the stage must be built not just for charisma, but for continuity, anchored by Anne's steady hand. The monarchy may face renewed public curiosity and family speculation, but within it, the message is clear. There is more to this institution than one person's image. It's woven from family, history, memory, and unspoken trust. Charles's gift to Anne reminds both palace insiders and the public that royalty wasn't built by fanfare alone, but by sacrifice, solidarity, and silent stewardship. The final question: what comes next? The velvet box closed. The brooch returned to its velvet clasp. The letter carefully stored. The moment ended. But questions continue to linger, unspoken inside, shouted aloud outside. What exactly did Charles say in the letter? If it contained private instructions, does that hint at succession planning not yet publicized? Will Anne carry those words forward to guide the monarchy's next phase? We know this exchange wasn't about changing the line of succession. William remains heir. But it may have changed how succession unfolds. Anne's known for her unwavering duty and discreet resolve. Could she soon serve as the palace's emotional bridge, a counselor to both king and heir during a fraught transition? Anne herself hasn't spoken, but sources say she has taken on new advisory responsibilities. She's already met privately with senior royals. She's been consulted more often behind the scenes. It's not a role with a title, but with purpose. A role she accepts, but doesn't publicly announce. As Charles's health journey continues, the monarchy must hold firm. There may be formal announcements ahead, a reduction in Charles's role, adjustments in Anne's duties, perhaps new charitable patronages. But for now, the final question remains suspended in palace air. Will this be a hidden shift, described only in history books? Or will it mark the quiet start of a royally guided transformation for a new generation? Because in that private room, with just a brooch, a photograph, a heartfelt letter, and tears, they planted seeds. Seeds of gratitude, seeds of reconciliation, seeds of hope for one of the most influential sisters in royal history. And while the castle remains, its heart is recalibrating. The world may never hear the full contents of that letter, but one thing is certain: the monarchy is shifting. With one final gift, King Charles passed more than legacy. He passed his heart. And now, Prince William carries not just duty, but his father's final message: it's time.